Welcome back to today's episode of the Psychedelic Mom podcast. I'm your host, Michaela Carlin. And for all of you who are new listeners, I'm so happy to have you here as we explore topics of consciousness and awakening and healing and psychedelics, and continue to expand our topics into optimization and biohacking. And for all of you who have been following and who reach out weekly to tell me about the different guests that really speak to your heart, I love hearing from you. I also love more and more hearing about some of the topics that you want us to explore. And today I'm so excited for this conversation. I have Stephanie Cohen here, who you've all seen before on my podcast. Stephanie and I did a 2-part series recently diving into what this path of being on a psychedelic journey is really like. So check out those episodes 70 and 71, where Stephanie shares her story. And Stephanie and I are going to be talking today with Licia Sky, who is a somatic educator, artist, singer-songwriter, and body worker who works with traumatized individuals and trains mental health professionals to use mindful meditation in movement, theater exercise, writing, and voice as tools for attunement, healing, and connection. She is a regular instructor in trauma healing workshops at Cape Cod Institute, Kripalu, and Esalen. She is also, I think it's okay to mention here that you are also the wife of Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score, and you travel with him. And I definitely want to dive into what you're seeing in the world and what you're teaching out there. For the past decade, you've been teaching expanded awareness in workshops to clinics and lay people around the world. Welcome here today. I'm so thrilled that you're here to share with us your experience and your work.
Thank you, Michaela. And good to see you, Stephanie.
So nice to see you, Licia. I assisted Licia at a workshop at Kripalu in, I think it was November. And she leads people in these very subtle exercises. And people had such profound breakthroughs with things that are very, very subtle. And it was a really beautiful experience for me. And I know the participants really had a lot of unconscious body experiences were made conscious through that weekend. And I think that's the magic of what you do.
Thank you.
Yeah. I love this word subtlety because the three of us, we were talking a little bit before we pressed record and talking about what it's like as people in the space who serve psychedelics and do somatic healing. The word subtle, I'm noticing in my own work and guiding someone to the subtlety of their body, of their breath, how profound that is. Can you speak a little bit to that and how you guide in that way and the importance of that intimacy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think opening to your own subtlety, intimacy is a great word. There's so many of us have a public face that we never take off.
Mm-hmm.
And that public face is the well-behaved one. It's the one that is scrubbed clean. It's like the social media face that people are so terrified of letting anybody see behind it. They don't even allow themselves to see behind that. And it takes a lot of effort and energy to keep that circumscribed performance going all the time. And when people take medicine and they have that mindset or that habit or that practice, it's very hard to get to the real person underneath that without, and so often people think, oh, I need a higher dose. Oh, I need a higher dose. And they have an experience when they're blasted out there, but it's not the same thing as meeting yourself, meeting what's truly inside and being able to bring it back. Bring back your experience and integrate it. And so the practices that I offer are practices of how do we take off that performance face? How do we take off the defenses that keep us from knowing the vulnerability that's inside, keep us from knowing the power that's inside. What I love most about working with psychedelics is that it has the ability to allow those things to emerge. But if there's the shell of an egg, which is a protection that's very delicate, that's very easy to crack, very easy to open and find out what's inside. And then there's the shell of like a metal safe or something that's stone that you could pound against. And so for me, embodied awareness is a way to unlock things before you take medicine. I mean, that's how I use it in a psychedelic experience. I use it anyway because I think any process, any therapeutic process where you're going in to heal yourself, you can't heal yourself without knowing yourself. And to know yourself, you have to unlock the things that are locked. So
I love that. I can almost even feel a little emotion, honestly, because
yeah.
the awareness of, and I'm not going to say life before psychedelics and life after, but what you were just talking about is psychedelics having this ability to unlock this awareness that we even have a mask. And
Yeah.
even the multiple layers of that mask and what it feels like to take those masks off and suddenly feel undefended. Like, I can look back and feel how defended I was in so many ways. And then it's just this,
Yeah.
what is there to defend and what is there to be other than here now with you in this present moment? It's such a gift. So I'm so excited about the work that you're doing in this talk of subtlety and body awareness. And
so if you were to meet like a client for the first time that has masks up and there's two questions I have and maybe we can do one then the other. But first, you've said many times, and I love that you say this, and Michaela talks about this a lot too. It's like you have to know your own system as a healer first to feel anyone else. So there's the question of like, how well do we know our own systems? And then how do you help someone begin to notice all the unconscious things that are happening in their bodies to have that expanded awareness?
Right. So I'll say right off that I never guide anybody in a journey unless I've worked extensively with them first. People come to me by referral, and so I have a teeny tiny practice because we're traveling so much. But I tend to spend several sessions just helping a person to get to know themselves before. For me, it's part of exploration that's necessary for really good intention setting. And usually the way I begin to help people to listen to their own bodies is I model and invite. So I'm modeling my own practice of listening to my own body, which is extensive. And my own practice of listening to my body includes all the things that I feel inside, muscularly, nervous, tense, relaxed, warm, cold, all the physical sensations that are attached to each different emotional state. And I have an extensive list I'm working on of what are all our emotional states, because we talk about happy, sad, mad, but I mean, there are literally thousands of words in our vocabularies across all languages that describe our emotional experiences with nuance and depth and subtlety that happy, sad, mad just don't get to. And um, there are different body postures related to those feelings, different facial expressions related to those feelings. Different breathing patterns and heart rates that are associated with those feelings. So my practice is always centering in my own body first, grounding in my own body first, finding language for my experience in the present moment. And as I'm finding that language, I'm sharing that language and inviting the person I'm working with to notice, what do you feel in your body when you hear me noticing these things about my body?
Mm.
So it's, I don't know, maybe it's like being on a ski trail with an instructor.
Mm-hmm.
I've been really lucky because I never skied until very late in life. And I went to this mountain and had a few lessons on a very, very tall slope with somebody who was very experienced, who just very slowly went down the mountain and talked through every aspect of turning my feet, breathing, lifting my head, every aspect of listening to my body as I went down the mountain. And embodied awareness is kind of like that. It's like listening to the subtle things in your body that you might think might think that you've taken it for granted. Why am I doing this when I learned how to do this when I was 1 year old? But the thing is that we're always changing. It's never the same from moment to moment. And there's so much that we miss by not being present, by just our assumptions, our habits, instead of our direct experience.
Yeah, I was just thinking that as you were talking, that in a lot of ways, what you're doing through your own presence and presencing the moment and what's happening interiorly, exteriorly is an invitation for somebody else. But I love that how you're describing the lesson in skiing. And I wonder also, you had probably already been so practiced in the awareness of your body, whether that helped with the skiing.
I had a bodywork practice for decades. And before that, I think I was always an intuitive person. I come from a multicultural family, and on my mother's side, I'm Japanese. And I grew up touching people because that's what we did in my family. I learned to massage my mother's tense shoulders. When I went to visit my family, my aunt walked on my feet when I was a little girl, and it felt amazing. It was like, oh, they don't do that in America. So I learned to listen to my body differently. I learned to have good, safe experiences with my body that I don't think are part of American culture. I'm really lucky for that. Here's how I would put it. Like in Western culture, and I learned to really appreciate cookbooks. I like to read them. I like to be inspired by them. But I never cook to follow a recipe exactly. I just can't. I'm somebody who has to kind of meander through the vegetable section and feel what looks best, what feels best. Oh, that's the freshest eggplant. Oh, those carrots look really great. The ginger, the smell of it, fresh lemons. I'll bring it home and I'll let the food tell me what it wants to be. So I'm listening. It's a very intuitive, interactive exchange. And that's how I did body work. When I had a massage practice, people would say, oh, how do you know? How did you know? And there's a way that I would just feel it in my body. I would feel what needed to happen or feel what I felt. I identify with the person's body. We resonate. We have mirror neurons. And I would sense a tension under the muscles, under the skin, and feel like, oh, how much pressure does this need? There's always this way of meeting, not moving through, but not being tentative, not being so hesitant that you don't fully meet what's there. And I guess that's an energetic thing. I don't know if I'm explaining it in a way that you can get it.
How do you become embodied, especially growing up here in the West? Like, how does one, I don't think people even know they're not embodied. And it's obviously like a lifelong journey. But I remember for me when it happened, I'm curious about the two of you. And Licia, yeah, when did it begin happening for you?
It's so many different things. I had a dog. I discovered a yoga book in the used bin of the bookstore. And discovered that, there are all these weird things that I thought only I did, and there they were in the book. I think I've always been very independent by necessity, that I grew up in a household where my independence was really, really important to my well-being. And my creativity was an adaptive resource that I really needed too. And I think that creativity requires some level of embodiment in order to manifest.
I mean, I would say for me, it's still an ongoing process, because I think what you said, Licia, is, it really is in the moment, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think the first experience for me was really young, doing some silent meetings in my school, like just having to sit for 15 minutes as a sixth grader every Friday in the quiet. And, you can sit there and use your imagination at times, but eventually you're going to come back to the subtleties. I found a used book, John Kabat-Zinn, Wherever You Go, There You Are. And then Awareness by Anthony DeMello at 20, that radically shifted my perspective of everything. And then a baby. And I think, honestly, probably the most embodied I felt for the first time was the presence that you have with a baby's foot, with their breath, with their smell. The moment is just like, there's nowhere else to be. And then I think then more children came, and then disembodiment came because you're so busy. You're so busy. And then it was like, oh my gosh, a return when things slowed down a bit. And there were moments, obviously, all along the way of mothering that are so embodied and so present. There's nowhere else to be but with the sound of the voice. But I did also have both the disembodied Western female persona. I was supposed to always show up fine. I was always supposed to cover my emotions. And I definitely took on in a Western disembodied without even being aware of it. I'm still in the practice of becoming more embodied. I think psychedelics was a huge, huge experience of that. I mean, I remember an experience of thinking that psychedelics gave me anxiety because I had never felt anxiety. So that's how disembodied I might have been. And I was like, oh my God, what's this? Psychedelics gave me anxiety. And it was just the realization that there might be some bypassing going on here, but I didn't even know.
Wow.
So I think it's been a deep exploration into myself. And then I think even the non-dual practices of meditation bring you even more subtly into what's the present. But I'm still working at it. I still have times where I'm noticing, wow, where was I for the last 5 minutes? And I'm coming back into presence and just more aware of the continual practice of it. Yeah. How about you, Steph?
I mean, I described New York City, and I may have gotten this line from someone. New York City is like a big head. And it might be different now, but when I was living there, it's just everyone's on the phone, everyone's going out for drinks, everyone's talking and banking and writing books and creating fashion and all the things that the rest of the world consumes, New York makes, But it's like one big head. For me, that's how I felt anyway. And then it was medicine. It was the first time I did MDMA and cannabis together. I was lying on the floor at the end of the ceremony, and I could see electricity running through my body. And it was like these beautiful neon iridescent colors, in that psychedelic way. And I literally asked the guy next to me, I could see electric currents running through my body. What is that? It was I could feel it and see it. And he was like, that's your chi. That's your body. And it was I went and I ended up like weeping that night a little bit because I was like, oh my God,
wow.
I don't think I'd felt that. I was like answering the phone, like New York Post, just like ahead, like reporting what other people said and what other people said, and then what I said, and then what I wrote, and then what they read. And it was all just like brain, 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 brain.
Wow.
And then that day I was like, or that night when Peter was like, that's your body that you're feeling. I was like,
Stephanie, that's so funny. I used to answer the phone in my first job so fast. Like I would just say, so I'd say my maiden name was Riley. So I'd say Michaela Riley and I'd go, Michaela Riley, Michaela Riley. And my boss said one day, the clients are wondering, who's this Killer Riley? I said it so fast that they thought I was saying Killer Riley, like instead of Michaela Riley. And I'm like, okay, I'll slow down.
I know. And that's what it was. It was just like post. And then I would like take notes on whatever they were, it was just like a lot of words.
Wow.
That's what it was. No feeling anything, no feeling the experience of being in connection with other humans. Just
not conscious feeling, because you were feeling, and those feelings were informing. And so it's interesting. What were you feeling that made you need to move so fast? What were you feeling that braced you against what you were feeling? Because the feelings are always there. Right.
I wasn't aware of it. And even now I have to remind myself in conversation with people, like include my body in this. What do because I see it as like a coil that like goes back up into the brain. And like I can just go back up and talk. You're so interesting. Tell me everything. And then it's like, can my body be part of this conversation right now too?
I can't believe how much our bodies know way before our minds actually do. Because if I really reflect back, Licia, what you were just saying, I was feeling. And what I was feeling was like, this is really uncomfortable. I have to move faster than what my body wants me to. I'm being asked a lot of things that are coming at me in ways that I actually am not comfortable with. And so it's interesting to know that our bodies know well before. You know?
Yeah. The way you were saying it, it was almost like I'm performing. So you could sense the pressure that you were feeling.
Let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned the word intuition, and we've talked a little bit here so far about the Western model. And again, we're looking at psychedelics, this work, working with different clients, our own systems. And you're married to Bessel, who is a psychiatrist who comes from the very Western model of education and wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score, which is just an incredible wisdom to know that our bodies are keeping the score of our lives and that everything lives within the body. How would you, as someone who learned more intuitively, as you mentioned, from a young age, compare the intuitive kind of healer and the Western model? How do they line up? How do they kind of take different directions? What's your thoughts?
Well, I think intuition is a complexity of listening and awareness that we don't always have language for. And when we don't have language for things, it's very hard to study them. But the Western way of looking at things scientifically is to try and tease things apart and say, what does this thing here have to do with this thing here? And when you're looking at a whole complex system, you might be saying, what does a right eye here have to do with a left hand here? And you might say, oh, well, if we take out this eye, what happens to this? It's kind of like you're looking at pieces of a whole, chunks of a whole thing that are so integrated that you couldn't possibly understand what you were changing that was so essential to the whole by taking out a piece as if it were a piece of a car that could be replaced with another piece of a car. Because we're not cars. And I think when we talk about our sensing systems, our systems of awareness, which go through our entire body, that go so deep internally that it has to do with the core muscles of our body, the internal organs, our spine, our skin, and then the space around us and what we sense in space around us, whether it's tight close to our body or whether it's big and filling a room awareness. There's so much involved all at once that unless you're trying to understand a whole thing, I mean, for me, that's what intuition is. It's like a whole system kind of knowing versus a block by block kind of knowing. I respect that block by block knowing. So much of this world that we exist in is here because of that. And fantastical technological feats, which maybe they wouldn't be possible if it was just intuitive knowing. You know, this mass production and mass replication of things and mass distribution of resources, those are all mechanical things that are really important. And yet when we talk like that about systems of distribution, I just was thinking about Rupert Sheldrake.
Sheldrake,
and, yeah. And his book about how mycelium know things and how they move and how they expand. It seemed to naturally replicate transportation systems in cities.
Right.
I've had meetings with researchers. I live with a researcher, a very open-minded researcher who tries very hard to get it and who I think works from a lot of intuition himself. And I've read the writings of a lot of scientists. And what's really interesting is how much they rely on intuition without disclosing that as part of their process of inquiry.
Because it'll be negated. It won't be, they won't be allowed to do that, I think, maybe.
I was reading a book by Elizabeth Myers recently called Extraordinary Knowing. It's a beautiful book. And she talks about therapists and medical doctors and their practices of presence and how they know things and what makes them effective and what their experiences are of people having extraordinary healing. And what she said is, most of them have those experiences, but will never disclose them to their colleagues for fear of professional retribution of some sort. And I think the repercussions of that are really astounding.
Well, it goes back to the whole, like New York being a big head. It's like they don't want people to be including the body and the intuition and the mirror neurons. It's like even... I don't want to get too off topic with this, but I'll just quickly say even the DSM, I find it's like exactly what you're saying. It's like taking apart every little behavior. And yes, of course, there's value in understanding that this, group of behaviors might be considered this diagnosis. But in the end, does it really help to know, like, someone's had a lot of trauma? And how do we meet them as a person, and as a healer without, oh, they're this or they're that. And I get the use of it, but it's almost better to not know in some ways, I think.
To say that a certain cluster of symptoms is one thing and you're going to treat the symptoms instead of the cause is really, that's sort of, for me, that's the essence of what the Body Keeps a Score is about, is like, oh, you have a cough. Well, a cough can be from many different things. And a cough could mean that you have a cold. Cough could mean that you have allergies. Cough could mean that you have cancer. Cough could mean that you have reflux. It could mean so many different things. And if you're coming from the set of, oh, a cough only means this one thing, then you're going to miss the core thing that's underneath. That's way more important than the cough itself, is how is this being, how is this person And even of our physical symptoms and physical illnesses come from a source of stress in our body that's untended to. And a lot of the stress in our body is emotional stress that prevents us from sleeping, prevents us from breathing properly, prevents us from having the ability to have a good digestion system and eliminate properly. Or they're all basic things that affect our hormones, our endocrine system, our metabolism, our ability to relate to each other.
So if you're working with somebody and you're really doing those prep sessions for a psychedelic integration, for example, how do you begin to track somebody and look at all these pieces of somebody who's coming to you?
I hate to say this because it sounds so zen.
Mm.
I'm really kind of being and noticing my responses moment to moment with the person I'm with. I'm not trying to pinpoint in a mechanistic way, oh, it's this thing or that thing. It's more like, oh, I'm holding my breath as this person says this. Oh, I can feel the tension in my shoulders. Oh, I'm sensing tension. And if something like that happens, I'll actually say to the person, well, I'm holding my breath as you say that. Or it might just cue me in to be more there with that person or support them more. It's not about me figuring out, it's about me listening. And that attentive listening helps someone to hear themselves and hear their experience more clearly. And that awareness, oh, my tension is in my shoulder, or oh, my heart is aching now. That might be my language for what's happening. We have this way, especially in Western culture, when we're having conversations, say, where we just want to fill every space and not let the power and energy of the silence be there. And that the silence is also a moment. The silence also contains feelings, many feelings that are very deep. And I see my role mostly these days as a companion witness, an acknowledger, a person who reflects back accurately what person has said in a way that can help them to own their experience. So much of our internal experiences are invalidated socially. To have the space to openly acknowledge our experience or our internal reality without having it invalidated or without having it be forced to shut down, even that can feel like immense breathing space to allow things to shift. And you might even begin to shift without noticing that you're shifting. And then suddenly you notice, oh, my heart rate has slowed down. That pounding in my chest that I didn't even know was pounding is suddenly silent. Oh, I just had a sigh. Oh, I just had a deeper breath myself. That might be what a person is physically feeling as they've said something in a way that they never thought they would say it, or they've reframed something from their past that they thought was terrifying, that they thought they would never survive. And they're still enough and present enough in their bodies that their bodies can understand more fully in the moment that they actually have survived. What's really astounding and gratifying is how powerfully people respond to a half an hour of paying attention to their bodies. I mean, I teach to larger and larger audiences, and it's almost like you can feel all these people in their little shells kind of open up and breathe
Mm.
and come alive in the room. Sitting in an auditorium is not really conducive to embodied experience usually.
Mm-hmm.
You're sitting straight ahead, you're in a packed space, it's crowded, you're supposed to be well behaved, you're supposed to be silent and listen, and you're looking forward, and you kind of put yourself in a little shell. And what I get to do with people is invite them to notice the shell they're in
Mm-hmm.
and invite them to help those shells to breathe and interact with each other and feel with awareness. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, we were in front of 1,100 people in New Zealand a couple weeks ago. And it's such a powerful thing when you can it's almost like spring, when everything starts coming through the ground
Mm-hmm.
that used to be frozen and all the sprouts are coming up and it feels like the whole world is waking. That's kind of what it's like
Mm-hmm.
to guide an embodied awareness practice. And I always call them practices. It's not a one and done. It's not a 20 and done. It's not this is your cure. You get 24 sessions and that's it for the year. And you should be over all your problems now. It's a process of being alive. You're not done being alive until you're not alive in your body anymore. And even then, you might have a consciousness that's alive in a different way. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very powerful thing to feel that response, that opening and that outpouring. Sometimes in an audience that size, you get as many different responses as there are people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who are so uptight, and when they finally start to relax, they fall asleep in their chair. And there are people who, when they start to feel things, get restless and really uncomfortable and get up and go to the bathroom. And there are people who are practiced meditators, say, and they bliss out because they think it's a wonderful thing. And there are people who notice things that they didn't realize they were responding to in their environments, who get surprised and wowed. Or there are people who are holding feelings that they didn't know they were playing so constantly inside themselves and there are people who are able to meet themselves with kindness and compassion in a way that they didn't know was possible. All those things can happen in a half an hour or an hour.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's very invigorating. It's very animating. It's very alive. It's very vivid and energizing for me. Bessel gets a lot of people who want his autographs and they want selfies with him because he's kind of a serious, and he's not that serious, but people tend to miss Dr. Vanderkolk kind of, and they're clutching their books and they want an autograph. And when we teach together, people come up to me and they go, "Can I have a hug?"
Oh, I love that. I love that.
And people tend to be really emotional when they meet me afterwards, after they've opened up, or they feel more connected to their bodies, and I'm the person who guided them to explore in that way, so they associate that with me. But it's not me personally, it's really a practice.
Well, it's not you personally, but I can feel myself slow down when I'm around you. Like, this conversation feels calm. I don't know if the listeners will feel that too, but it's like, I can feel like I can breathe. I feel like I can pay attention to my body. You're just you're very relaxed. And I think that the mirror neuron...
It's
presence. Yeah, like, my body's like, oh, it's okay to take a deep breath right now. It feels nice.
Yeah.
Can I have a hug? Please.
Anytime, of course.
I'm curious how psychedelics have supported this practice that you have and the medicines that you are serving. We are in this like psychedelic frontier, really. And so it's nice to gather some data and hear about other practitioners, what they're actually seeing.
Yeah.
So I'm curious.
I love working with psychedelics. Ketamine is the thing that I work with. It's such a beautiful, beautiful, powerful medicine that can also be misused.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand the power of it as an anesthetic, which is very different than the power of using it for an experience of meeting yourself. And I think the anesthetic quality of ketamine is a really important part of its power. For people who have a lot of trauma inside, their feelings, it's not like a feeling of disappointment that you missed getting tickets to a show that you wanted, and it's not even like the stress of driving in heavy traffic or something. People who have trauma in their lives, especially early childhood trauma, early life experience trauma, where it's not a one-off situation, it's a situation of consistent abuse or neglect or both.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be sexual, which is all of the above. Those experiences, those formative life situations, they create habits of survival, habits of attention that require us to be vigilant or practice suppressing our emotional awareness, practice dissociating from the things that we would normally expect to be able to be comforted from. There is no comfort for children who grow up in those kinds of situations. There is only the ways of learning to control, tamp down, regulate, master. All those words have to do with top-down suppression.
Mm-hmm.
And all the processes that I work with have to do with gentle emergence and meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that comes up that is painful needs to be met with something that's compassionate and supportive and comforting and holding and releasing with tremendous respect for everything that a person had to do to survive, including addiction, being an asshole, being a perpetrator, whatever it is that you've had to do in your crazy making life to survive. Because it's not really possible to let go of the things that helped you to survive unless you're safe enough to let them go. And it's not about an external safety, because there's no guarantee of that ever, really, absolutely. It's more coming to a place where you can know yourself enough to trust yourself, to be able to let go of things, know yourself enough to trust that you're not betraying yourself by letting go of this thing that helped you survive.
You were talking about ketamine. How would you say that ketamine supports that process for somebody?
Okay, so you can be blasted out to the most colorful, otherworldly psychedelic experience on a high dose with ketamine. And some people think, yeah, it's almost like going to an amusement park and getting the best ride. But you could also, people say, oh, I met God, it was so great, and they're euphoric, but there's this other thing where with lower doses in the MDMA study, they found caused people to feel anxiety. My sense is more that it opened them to experience the anxiety that's already there. With lower doses, people can have very intense emotional experiences, very intense recollection recollections of very, very painful things that they may have been in denial about. Oh, that didn't really happen. That's just my mind making things up. I don't know why my mind keeps making up this horrific thing. I must be really sick because I keep making this thing up. And they go into the experience and they're like, oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
Not only did this really happen, it was even worse than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And not in a running away kind of way, not in a tearing your hair out, oh, I'm a victim way. It's more like a full witnessing is possible. A witnessing almost with a soul depth is possible. And I think it's not just that, because we're witnessing things sometimes that are so intensely painful that without the medicine's anesthetic quality, they would be unbearable. And so having a safe person who co-creates a safe container for the person to meet themselves, who creates a calm and peaceful place where they are not left alone, forsaken with their experience, but can be met with respect and comfort and love, makes it possible for a person to witness their experience, accept themselves without the physical pain. See, the thing that we don't really acknowledge is that our emotions all have a physical correlation. There's a physical resonance with each emotion. Different muscles, different tensions in our larynx, in our gut, in our chest, in our hands, in our arms, in our feet, everything, here right to the top of your head. We have spinal alignments and facial expressions that have to do with our feelings. And it's not called gut wrench for no reason. It's not called heartbreak for no reason.
No.
They're excruciating physical sensations. And there's a way with ketamine that those physical sensations are quieted a little bit, enough that they can be present. And when you can have quiet and presence with something that's very intense, you can see something clearly for the first time that you haven't been able to look at perhaps for your whole life, perhaps for decades. Insight and revelation can happen that can feel liberating. Sometimes after the most painful experiences where I'm holding a person's hand and they're in agony, they can suddenly take a breath, have compassion for themselves, and that compassion for themselves, not something that they're seeking from outside, but it's there that they didn't know they had, can be so liberating, can be so exalting. They can feel as if they're floating and lifting and flying and expanding with joy. And you know, and that sounds wonderful. And the thing is that I wish that that could be the fix and we could say, okay, you're done. And with people who've had intense childhood traumas, it's the first time they've been able to witness that in themselves. It's the first time they've been able to harvest insight in that way. It begins a new relationship with themselves, but it's not the finishing of it. And the insights that you can achieve with medicine, you actually have to practice. And it's hard work to bring them back and integrate them alongside lifelong ingrained habits of survival. It's very hard work. And, I think it would almost be a kind of psychic violence to say, oh, you had that experience. Why can't you keep walking with that knowledge that you brought back? Why isn't that working for you now? And for some people, it's a lifelong process. I've been reading Stan Grof's books, and there's some people that he took on hundreds of LSD journeys. I mean, just like in order for them to be in the place where they could be integrated enough to feel whole. And I was reading Carl Jung talking about a woman he worked with who didn't integrate until the end of her life, when suddenly she was able to be lucid in a way that she hadn't been for years and years. I think this press a button, do your 10 sessions, heal and you're done thing is it's not my expectation of how things go. Like these ketamine clinics where they say in 6 sessions your deep depression will be gone. And they put a person in a room with no intention setting, nobody in the room with them as they're having the medicine. And they have a period of resting after so that they can be clear, and then they can go home with no processing at all. Or they say, oh, go process with your therapist who might not know anything about psychedelics. I think that's so wrong. That's such a misuse of a really powerful medicine by people who don't understand inner life.
We had a client recently actually tell us about a clinic that she went to in New York City. She was in. And she said it was so disorienting. It was ketamine. And then the whole experience was 3 hours in and out onto the street of New York City.
Oh my God.
And she said it was so incredibly disorienting.
No.
And I thought, I can't even imagine that should ever be allowed.
Right. And I know a lot of people who are using the medicine say, oh, the half-life is so short, it's really convenient. You can be done. They can have 3 or 4 sessions going at the same time. It's so cavalier and mechanistic, as if each individual's person's body wasn't different. Oh, the metabolizing is 45 minutes. And they act as if, there's this peak that you want. And then after that peak, you just kind of come out of it as fast as you can and you're done. And for me, a really, really important part of the experience is what I call savoring. That you are as present in your body and as present in your experience as you can be for as long as it subtly lasts, which is very, very different.
I love that.
It's like being in an intense dream and then wanting to remember as much of the dream as you can because there's insight there. So you don't want to wake up and put your shoes on and think about what you got to do for the rest of the day, which, I've had people come into sessions and go, okay, the medicine's over. It's not working anymore. And they're missing. They're missing so much. They're throwing away the integration when they do that.
Yeah.
So, and insights happen hours later, days later, months later. It's all a process. So I don't even rush sessions. It's not 6 sessions in 6 weeks or 6 sessions in 3 weeks. It's like we have a session. And then we might process, you might make art, you might journal, you might go for walks, you might have a dream. It might be 2 months later before you feel like you're ready for another session. I think it's really important to not treat these as throwaway things, as ephemeral dreams where you're just going to lose it all, and the only important thing is some unconscious after effect.
You are so beautiful with your words and your descriptions, just even the word savor, to just savor those moments. And also, as you mentioned, that many people with trauma are really like gut wrenching is a thing. And having your heart broken open on these sessions is a thing. So that quick in and out doesn't even make sense. It doesn't make sense because you're holding that really the adult who's maybe seeing something for the first time. But you're also holding the child that viscerally felt the experience and now is kind of revisiting that live, that child who had those experiences.
Oh,
Yeah.
one thing I'll say is that psychedelics, I think a lot of the insight that I've seen people have has to do with realizing that things are possible that they didn't think were possible. Realizing that a level of calmness in their bodies is possible that they didn't understand was possible. Realizing that joy is possible that they didn't think was possible. Realizing love might be possible that they didn't think was possible. I mean, those are intangible in one way, but they're so powerful. Kind of like the wind that you can't see, or solar radiation that you can't see, but you can feel it. You can feel the power of those things. And those are the things that emerge in psychedelic experiences that I think are the most important things to take back. Stillness, joy, warmth, kindness, subtlety, the power of subtlety, the power of our vulnerability. But those things translate into how we live. And people live differently because of those insights and those new capacities that they have to practice coming back to.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this wisdom that you have and your presence, just your presence, and how you are so beautiful at articulating the subtlety, the what is subtle. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I would love, actually, and I don't know if you'd be willing to do this, but I'd love to have you come back and do an experiential for an audience, like just walk through an embodied practice.
Sure. I'd love to.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I could go for like 3 more hours, honestly.
It's been really wonderful to talk with you. I think this conversation has helped me to bring out many things that I think about but haven't had a chance to say in this way. So thank you.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. I'm just so grateful, honestly, for you to be here and what you're doing in the world and Bessel's book and how many lives it has touched and how many lives you are touching. And just like, I feel a warm hug already. Your presence is incredibly beautiful. So, and that I know is cultivated moment by moment. There's an innate, beauty and savoring that you have, but I know the work that takes to continue to cultivate that. So thank you for the depths of what work you've done to be as present as you are in your body and to hold that kind of space for others in the world, really.
Thank you, Michaela. Thank you, Stephanie.
This talk has brought tears to my eyes a couple of times. It's like you can just release more when things are, like you're saying, calm and quiet, and the ability, there's people around that can just like, you can relax with. It really has brought a lot of emotion to my eyes. And I am so grateful that you were able to come on the podcast this morning and be with us, and keep just doing that beautiful work that you're doing, connecting others to their light in the world. We need it. Thank you.
Thank you.